Hi, I'm Naphtali Hoff, President of Impactful Coaching and Consulting and author of Becoming the New Boss. I work with leaders in all different ways, but today I'm focusing on one person, the new leader. The new leader is defined as somebody who's transitioning into leadership for the first time. Or perhaps we're talking about somebody who's transitioning from within a company, from one level of leadership to the next. Maybe you're transitioning from a different company completely and you're starting new. Now this is an exciting time. I've been there. I know what it's like to run a company, run an organization. I have had success in leadership. I know exactly what you're going through right now. It's a great time. It's an exciting time. It's a tremendous opportunity. But it's also a scary time. We all know the difficulties associated with leadership. We know how hard it can be to move and to transition from one point to the other. And so what I want to talk to you about today is how do you get yourself established in leadership? How do you succeed? What are the steps you can start to take in order to ensure that this leadership transition is absolutely the very best thing ever? In fact, I wrote Becoming the New Boss for this reason. I wanted to make sure that every leader who comes into a leadership position understands the challenges and the opportunities and the practical steps that you can take in order to ensure that you are successful. You want to make sure that you get initial traction and you want to have sustained success. So that's what this video is all about. We all know the impact of leaders. Leaders provide clarity of purpose and direction. They help to align mission and vision. They help increase engagement and morale. And leaders also have the ability to anticipate changes in the marketplace. So we know that leadership and leaders are very significant. But we also know that new leaders have a lot of challenges. If you're a new leader, you have to adapt to a new environment. You have to figure out what's going on, learn the culture, understand the circumstances. You also need to be working on building your networks, new relationships, dealing with people you've never dealt with before. And even if you're a seasoned veteran leader, you still have challenges to work through. Number one, you've got to develop competencies in a new environment. And number two, you've got to make the shift. You have to understand how do I take my leadership talents? How do I take everything that I've learned and adapt it and utilize it in this new environment? Those are some of the challenges that new leaders have to deal with. Now, we could have this conversation at any time, but we also know that the very beginning is critical. Decisions are made about your ability from the very beginning. People are looking at your every move. They want to know, are you the right person who's going to lead them into the future? And research tells us very clearly that it's the first 90 days in particular that people are focused on your success. 90 days is a quarter of a year. 90 days is a time that people can measure how the company, how the business, how the organization is functioning and performing. And we know that those first 90 days, people are solidifying their impressions of you during this critical time. And that's why at the very beginning, we need to focus on what can you be doing? What are the steps you could be taking to make sure that you get off on the right foot and you get that sustained success? Transitions are all about building momentum. If you start off on the right foot, you get some early wins, you build positive motivation and direction, you have a great chance to succeed. You have this ability to utilize that early momentum until you reach that break-even point where your gains, where your accomplishments are starting to balance out, and then from there it's usually smooth sailing. In contrast, if you don't build that equity, if you don't lay that foundation, if people aren't trusting in you from the beginning, you can have lots of challenges, and it can be awfully difficult to ever overcome those initial challenges that you establish for yourself. Now, I can speak to you personally from my own experience. I was a leader of a school. I know what it's like to go into a school, to deal with transition, to deal with individuals who have expectations, and for me to go in with my own set of expectations. And how I handled it at times wasn't so great. You know, I made some decisions without necessarily consulting with the right people. I moved forward with plans without building necessary equity. I made some missteps along the way, stepped on some toes, and did some things that caused people to be upset and to be concerned. And so I didn't really know where to turn. And there was this breakthrough moment for me. It came in my second year. Things were difficult. Matters with the board, matters with teachers, matters with members of the community. I didn't know where to turn. And I really was struggling. And I felt like everywhere I turned, people were expressing concerns, and I couldn't get out of it. No matter how much I tried, I couldn't just break through and gain the positive momentum that I really wanted. And so I sought out some help. And we brought down a consultant, and she was fantastic. She came, she met with me, she met with everybody involved. She got a lot of information. And when she provided me with that feedback and that report, and it started to establish some strategic directions that we could rally behind, where everybody was part of it, people were embracing the ideas, and then we could take concrete, actionable steps, moving in the right positive direction. Ultimately, everything started to change. There was an air of positivity. It was almost like the air was let out of the balloon, and we were just able to move forward with ease and with confidence, but with momentum and with direction. And all of that happened because somebody helped me to chart a clear path forward, together with my team, together with everybody around us. It wasn't just me against them anymore, it was me together with them and leading them. But that was only possible because we were able to get unification, we were able to get common sense of direction, we were able to move this process forward. So as I said before, transitions are all about positive movement and direction. When you go ahead and you start to move things in the right way, then all of a sudden, things just pick up one from the other. They start to move in that same common positive direction because you've gotten that energy going. So now, I bet you've got a lot of questions. If you're a new leader, probably just like I was, you have lots of things floating through your mind. For example, you want to know, how am I going to achieve immediate success? Will people have confidence in me? How can I reduce fears as I get started in my process? How do I lead former peers if I'm coming from the same organization and now I've been promoted? How do I become quickly integrated if I'm a new leader and start to understand the culture? How do I start to understand how to make a difference? Here's a really important one, especially for new leaders. How do I gain experience quickly? How do I learn the ropes and know what to do so that I look like I'm really positioned for leadership and I should be doing this? How do I stay calm and focused when things get difficult? And trust me, they're going to get difficult. That's just the way it is. How do I maximize effort and increase productivity? How do I ask for help without looking weak and without looking uninformed? And how do I set reasonable, measurable expectations that everybody can agree to and that we could actually measure in a way that we know that we're making progress and success? And we're here to talk about one of these key things right now. So I'd like to talk to you about something called values. Values are really important because values ultimately determine the direction that we take, the things we embrace the most, the things that we value, the things that we appreciate. And so any good organization has a list of values because that allows them to know where to go and how to operate. So when you're a new leader, when you're walking into an organization, one great way to get started is to take a look at the values. Maybe they already have an existing values list, maybe they don't. But either way, it would be a great opportunity for you to look at it together with them, to discuss with your team what are the key values, what are the key ideas, what are the key issues that we should make as the determination of how we operate, how we determine policy, etc., etc. So let's say you went ahead and you came together, you gave everybody a values list, it's got 50, 60, 70, however many values, and then a bunch of them online that you could find. And you worked together, you began the conversation, you took a vote from everybody, and you came up with this list over here. And so in this particular one, folks wanted to make a difference. At the same time, they want to be accountable. Focus on detail, deliver quality, being completely honest in keeping promises, being reliable, meeting deadlines, being positive, being a great team member, respecting the company's policy and rules, and showing tolerance. So you've got these 10 values over here, and they're great, they're all important. Nobody would deny that these are meaningful and significant. Now I happen to highlight a few of them in red because sometimes some of the values conflict with one another. On the one hand, you want people to be accountable. On the other hand, you want to be able to show tolerance, for example. What happens if a person isn't fully accountable? What do you do in those cases? And so having a conversation with your team, these are the values that we created. We identified them from the list, and now we're going to go ahead and we're going to figure out applications for those values. And what do we do when the values might seem to conflict with one another? Give your team scenarios, discuss situations, figure out what do we do here and what do we do there, and how are we going to make it work in this case. And if you go through that process and you get everybody conversing and you get everybody discussing, then you can really generate some outcomes. But what happens if you're still not sure? You all agree that this is important and this is important, and you're just not sure. How do you go through a process of ultimately determining which values are most important to you? Which are the ones that are going to override everything else? Which are the ones that are going to really make the biggest difference and going to be the ones that you prioritize when you have to make difficult decisions about policy, about procedure, about dealing with individual situations? How do you handle that? So let's take a look at something called a paired comparison. You'll notice over here in this paired comparison, what I did was I included all of the 10 values that we talked about before. The 3 that were in red are now asterisked over here. And I have now a grid that I've created in order to allow me to compare and contrast the various values with one another. So this square is going to be empty because I can't compare, this square is going to be empty because I can't compare A with A, but I can compare A with B. And in this particular case, talking about making a difference versus being accountable, in this particular case I may have decided that making a difference is more important, and we're going to rank them 1, 2, or 3. 3 being the most impactful, 1 being the least significant, 2 being somewhere in the middle. And so what you begin to do is you compare A to B, and then you compare A to C, and then you compare A to D, and then A to E, and on and on and on you go. And you continue with all of them, and you fill in all of the boxes. And eventually what starts to emerge as you have that conversation is you start to see that certain values are continually rising to the top. Those are the values that are most important and significant to you in your value levels, if you will. And that's important for you to determine, because at the end of the day, you're going to have some times where the values either butt up against one another, or you have to make a decision. Do I go this way or do I go that way? So when you're a new leader, you're trying to think of ways, how can I get early wins? What are things that I can do to make an imprint, to make a difference, that people recognize my leadership, but I do so in a way that's not threatening. I do so in a way that allows people to still feel comfortable, that gives them a voice, it gives them a sense of direction, that we're making progress, but we're not rocking the boat too much. I'm not engaging in change right now. I'm simply trying to get adjusted and acclimated with my new team and align with them and make sure that they and I are on the same page, so that whatever decisions we make moving forward, when we have to introduce change, when we have to make decisions, when we have to sometimes deal with difficult questions, marketplace-driven questions or other questions, we will have a set of values in place that are going to drive that decision making. And that can be a very powerful win for a new leader. Let me tell you a great story about values. You know, recently there was a young Japanese executive who became the CEO of his company. His grandfather had started the company. Many people in the leadership team were far older than this new executive. And frankly, in that culture in particular, they didn't respect the young man the way that they might have respected his grandfather or even his father. And so this young man had a difficult time. The new executive was struggling. How am I going to get people to respect me? But more importantly, how am I going to lead them and lead the company into the future? He just didn't know. And so he had this idea. And the idea was, let's establish some values. And he worked with his team in the process that we talked about. He got them focused and aligned on the things that were most important to them and to the company in order for that to succeed. And ultimately what started to happen was, now that he had conversations with his team, it was no longer about what I feel as the new boss, what I think, my opinion. It was all about what the values say. And these are values that we agree to. And when you get people to agree to them, you get their buy-in, you get their advancement, you get their insistence, you get their support, because they have committed to it. You know, I remember once I was with my faculty, and we had a program that we were introducing in school. And the program was about behavior and values-based decisions associated with those behaviors. And so we wanted to move things forward with different values that we had identified that are going to really motivate how we instruct students to behave. And the values included respect and responsibility and safety and things of the sort. And I'm having a conversation at a faculty meeting. We're talking about how we're going to move this thing forward, planning all of that good stuff. And one gentleman who was part of the staff who really hadn't bought in for whatever the reason, he started to argue, do we really need this, and why are we spending so much time with it? Back and forth the conversation started to go. All of a sudden, one of the members of the faculty who really didn't pipe up very much, she piped up and she said, why are you bothering with this? We already agreed to it. Let's move on. And that's the beauty of values. Once you've established what you really stand for and what you're all about, then you don't have to keep going back to it again and again and again. Of course, you want to remind everyone, you want to keep the values front and center, you want everybody to appreciate what they are and how they work. But the key thing is, you're no longer having to fight that battle each and every time because the values drive your process. Now, you might say to me, who are you to talk about these various issues? Right? Your background is in school leadership. I'm not in a school. I work in a company. I work in an organization that's very different than a school environment, and that might be true. I agree with you. Having a school background is different than having worked in corporate America, but I do want to be clear on one thing. To me, and I think all research bears this out, leadership is universal. The ideas of how you motivate others, the concepts and the strategies necessary to advance change, the concept of making those connections to ensure that people get the influence, the support, the direction that a leader needs to provide, the context there really makes no difference. And so the key thing that we have to think about when we're discussing new leaders and their transition, your success, your future, is all about understanding the fundamental underlying leadership principles that drives this process. You may also say to me, I don't even know what I don't know. I'm going in, I'm overwhelmed. How can I even begin this process? I think I just need to jump right in and hope for the best. But let me be clear, I tried that and it didn't work very well, at least not at the beginning. And so many people, it's so sad to say this, but the research about new leaders and their transition is very scary. Research tells us time and again that too many leaders don't get off on the right foot. And that's why it's critical for us to have conversations like this. That's why it's so important for us to be able to talk about practical strategies that leaders could use as they walk in the door and get themselves acclimated, get themselves adjusted in order to achieve success. In our next video, we're going to go even deeper. And we're going to talk about yet another leadership strategy that is so important for everybody to get and get it really well. And I'm referring specifically to listening. We're going to talk about it. Why is listening so important? And more importantly, how do I do it? 7 tips for successful listening. If you can follow these tips, if you can go ahead and implement them, it's going to make a huge difference in establishing those relationships which are so critical for a leader's success. Now, I really hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. I love to talk about leadership, and especially with those who I can connect with so deeply. People who are transitioning in for that first time or moving over within the positions, all those folks that I mentioned before. I really hope you enjoyed watching this video. It was such a treat for me to be able to share these ideas with you. I love talking about leadership. Do me a favor, leave some comments in the area below. Let me know your thoughts about the video. What resonated with you? What do you want to know more about? The key thing is we have a conversation. I want to make sure that this is a dialogue where we can engage with one another because I am here to serve. And my hope is that through our process today and in the videos that are going to follow, you're going to start to see the real importance of being strategic in going into a new leadership position, and how do you take and achieve the levels of success necessary so that you're just hitting the ground, running, and having that sustained success for the future.